Hello, I'm Tom from Big Tom Driving School. I want to do a short video for you today. A few things I want to cover. The first is how to deal with the pressure from traffic behind you. How a really handy tip to help you deal when you're feeling like a little bit of pressure from any cars or vehicles that are directly behind you. I want to have a little talk about how you can look after yourself, your own welfare, if you like, when you're doing one of the Big Tom intensive driving courses. I want to talk briefly about the new drive test that's kicking in December, so a couple of months. And then lastly, I just want to briefly talk about the theory test and the theory study. So this business about vehicles being behind, and you look in your central mirror and you know that they're behind you. I'm not necessarily saying they're tailgating. Tailgating is when they're really close behind you, but just the fact that you are aware they are there. Sometimes that can be really off-putting because you're thinking to yourself, oh, I don't want to be holding people up. I don't want to inconvenience anybody. And so you consequently, maybe not, this isn't necessarily in the forefront of your mind, but it's in there anyway, and it affects the way that you drive. Let's say you're going to turn left. So you're in the major road and you're going to turn left into the minor road, and you know that vehicle's behind you, and so you leave the setting of the speed, you leave that a little bit too late. You don't brake in time. The consequences, you don't brake in time, so therefore you're leaving everything a bit too late. That means then that you're changing gear a bit too late. That then means that you're then clutch isn't up and you're what we call coasting round the bend, and your hands are busy because they're trying to do two jobs at one time. On it goes, and that then affects the position as you go into the minor road. It's amazing the effect this has, and this is all been brought about by what was going on behind you. And I'm not trying to trivialize this because I realize that it's real for you. But at the end of the day, it really, when you're in the car and you're driving along, you want to be making sure that you're in control of the outcomes. And if that means that you do things a little bit more methodical and thorough and therefore well, then that would be time well spent, as opposed to trying to get yourself out of the way of everyone. And one little tip I can give you is this idea about the no feet. I talk about it in the driving videos that are sent over to you before your course, your intensive driving course. If you can get used to this idea of, on the approach to a junction, getting the speed down first, sooner, even if there are vehicles behind, so that you can then get it in the correct gear sooner, and the clutch comes up sooner, then what happens is that you'll find the feet aren't really busy. In fact, they're doing nothing. You're not on the brake, you're not on the gas, you're not on the clutch, and consequently your mind can then concentrate on the job in hand with regards to the position and the observations necessary to do the junction. So this idea of no feet is something that I really would recommend you kind of get into your minds and try to incorporate that well in advance of the junctions. Failing to do that, then what tends to happen is you get a bit overworked with too many jobs to do all at the last minute, and it all comes across really pressured stuff, and that just adds to your anxiety actually. So you've got to try and get yourself a little bit selfish for yourself. You're trying to learn a new skill here, practical skill, and that requires you, generally speaking, to do things a little bit slower, but methodical and correct, technically correct. You will find with the passing of time that once you get into the habit of doing it technically correct, but slower, it will naturally improve, the pace will increase. And so that just happens naturally. You don't have to force it. It just does happen. But of course, you've got to I suppose, get a bit of a thick skin. And when you realise there's vehicles behind you, it's kind of like saying, just don't forget to breathe and try not to allow them to affect the outcomes of what you're trying to practice. As I say, it's not lost on me. It's an easy thing for me to say now, isn't it? But it is something that I reckon is quite a good important bit of advice for you, really. So that's the power of no feet. Yeah, no feet. Okay, then talking about looking after yourself on the intensive driving course itself, one thing to bear in mind with all of this is that although you might be with me for 4 hours or so, you're not constantly driving. No one would expect you to drive constantly for 4 hours. It'd be ridiculous. But, you know, do think about how it's going to work with regards to maybe your commitments at work or at college. You know, we are all busy people, but you are learning. Again, it's a new practical skill, and it's quite you know, in terms of the thought processes, it's quite mentally tiring. You know, so do yourself a favour, and if you either get some time off of your work or build in some hours between either your commitment and the course, or the course and then your work commitment or your college, you know, because it is something that if you don't pay any attention to that at all, I mean, you're on the course, you get pit stops, you get drinks paid for you, and I would encourage you to make use of these things because time spent just reflecting and just calming down for a second and reflecting on what you're doing is time well spent, actually, as opposed to just thinking to yourself that you've just got to sort of sit there and keep on going, and I'm getting more and more tired. You've got to look after yourself, really. So that's the sort of basic bit of advice I would say for you. The new driving test, all the driving instructors now have been given this new booklet about the test. I just wanted to mention about the bay parking side of things, because it's the bit that's coming out is that the turn in the road, what used to be called the 3-point turn, that's going out the window, as is the reversing into the junction, left or right, reversing into the junction, that's going out the window. And what's going in there now is you're going to have a parallel park at the side of the road, parking in a bay, and pulling up on the right side of the road to then reverse and then move off. So you're going to get one of those. And the parking in the bay, if I can just quote from you with regards to here, that the examiner is going to ask you to park in it used to be the test centres, didn't it? But it's now going to be, they're going to have places where they're going to ask you to do this so it's a bit more lifelike, real life, I suppose. Hotels and retail parks, that kind of thing. I'd like you to drive forward into a convenient parking bay, finishing within the lines, either to the left or the right. Now I'd like you to reverse out either to the left or the right. So really, you know, it's going to ask you to park in a bay by either driving in forwards and reversing out, or, as has been done historically, the reversing in and then driving out. So you see the subtle difference there? It's no great shakes, certainly not in terms of what you're going to be doing on your intensive driving course with Big Tom. But it's just worth you knowing that is what's happening as of December. Okay, so that's something about the new driving test. Last thing I want to talk about is just the theory side of things, really, because the theory study is giving you some indication of what we tend to class as the rules of the road, you know, the highway code. Who should I be giving way to? What is the situation here? Who's got priority in this situation? And do I have to give way to the pedestrian? All those kind of things where there's the law, the legal side of things, and there's also just good advice about the rules of the road. So if you have got no previous experience of, say, riding a bike on a public road, or in fact anything at all to do with public roads and driving, then do get yourself stuck into all of that, because that's going to be really useful to you. You know, you can then apply that as you're driving around. I'm not saying necessarily that you have to pass the theory test before you do your Big Tom intensive driving course, but if you can get some knowledge about these things, then that's great. that's good really, because you're sort of preparing yourself for what's coming your way. It's funny, you know, if you look at what happens on a bike when you're cycling along, in terms of the position in the road for junctions and in terms of signals, there's a lot of transferable skills actually, and some people have got that experience and some people don't. So really I'm just encouraging you to recognize the fact that the theory is not supposed to be, it's never has been intended to be an academic test that you pass and then forget about. It never was intended and never is intended for that. It's real practical skills that you then apply, sorry, not just skills, knowledge, real practical knowledge that you then apply in real life situations when you're driving along. I want to emphasize that. So there was 4 things there then. There was this business about the no feet, not being intimidated by vehicles behind, concentrating on doing what you want to do methodically, thoroughly, perhaps a little slower to begin with, but at least it's being done well, so quality rather than quantity, and then you'll find that will just naturally pick up. Then I talked about a little bit about how to look after yourself when you're on your Big Tom intensive driving course. Then I talked about the little bit of change there in the bay parking side of things for the new driving test come December, and then this business about the practical aspect of the theory study and how we apply that as we're driving along. Hope that's all helpful to you. Okay, cheers.